Hello and welcome to Oregon State University's Farm to Fork Webinar Series. My name is Sherry Cole and I'll be moderating the webinar today. I am in the Food Science and Technology Department at OSU and I lead the Sustainable Food Manufacturing Program. So first, I want to just thank you for taking the time to join us today and welcome you. We know you have a lot that's competing with you for your time and attention, and so thanks for spending some of that with us. I wanted to just talk a little bit briefly about the intention of this series. We really think it's important to bring the stories of how our food systems work, and really importantly, how they're changing to become more sustainable and resilient, and the people behind that change. Our food system is really diverse, and so we hope that the stories that we're bringing you really reflect that diversity. So before I introduce today's speaker, I just want to briefly walk through some logistics. First, we really do want to make this as much of a conversation as we can. And so we are really interested in hearing any questions that you have. So you'll see the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. You can click on that, add your questions throughout the presentation. I'll prompt you once if you kind of get engrossed and you forget. And then if you see other questions that people have posted and you like them, you can upvote those, and then those will rise to the top of the list. So the other thing is we're recording this webinar, and afterwards it'll be posted on our website. So we really encourage you to go back and look at that if you are interested, or share it with other people. So with that, I would like to introduce Rebecca Mick, who will be talking with us about trends in more sustainable and flexible packaging. Welcome, Rebecca.
All right, there we go. We're all set. Thank you, Sherry. All right, so thank you all for having me. Just give me 1 second to get myself set up here. Perfect. Okay, so thank you. I am Rebecca Mick. I am the technical sustainability lead for Amcor, and I've been with Amcor for almost 8 years. I work in our global core R&D group with the task of really coordinating our global R&D approach around sustainability. I'm happy to be here today to share with you some of the trends trending towards more sustainability in flexible packaging. So first off, for those of you who don't know, Amcor is a global company with nearly 50,000 colleagues located at over 200 facilities around the world. And I am located right there in Neenah, Wisconsin at one of our global innovation centers. We are a packaging company serving customers with closures, specialty cartons, rigid and flexible packaging, predominantly for food and beverage markets. I work in our flexibles business, which, as you can see, is the largest portion of our business. And so that's really where we're focusing today is flexible packaging and films. So sustainability is a priority at Amcor. My job is 100% devoted to improving the environmental impact of our global flexible packaging portfolio. We believe that there will always be a need for packaging, right? We're not going to grow all of our food in our backyards again. But now, beyond simply protecting the products, consumers want their packaging to have a more circular end of life. So this comes through being very intentional with packaging design, promoting additional waste management infrastructure whenever possible, and encouraging consumers to participate in the circular life cycle of their packaging. So we believe, of course, that Amcor is well positioned to accomplish this, especially due to our talented global R&D team. All right, so let's get into it. Why do we need packaging? Well, we need it to protect our products from the point of production all the way to the consumption and the entire value chain in between. We design packaging to preserve the quality of the product so that you can have the maximum length of time and you can enjoy the lettuce that's in your fridge right now, even though it was probably picked a month ago or more. Packaging gives us and really gives brands the ability to communicate to consumers, right? It has a great billboard effect. And it really gives consumers conveniences that we don't realize are there until they don't work right So think about things like reclosable zippers, easy tear opening, right? Gone are the days where you have to get a scissors out to open every single package in your fridge. So those are really important features that we can incorporate. And without packaging, we wouldn't be able to really have mass production of things like cheese. As I mentioned, I'm from Wisconsin. You'll see a bit of a trend there because you can't really ship it far enough without being able to have that packaging to protect it. And finally, something that is often overlooked is that packaging really does keep our food and medical devices sterile. It provides hermetic seals that actually form a physical barrier between the product and the environment, right? Which can keep things as simple as bacteria and viruses out of that. But there's actually another aspect that packaging does that we don't always talk about, and that is it is an effective way to address food waste, right? We talked about shelf life, and that goes very much along with food waste, right? So you've probably seen a statistic similar to this at some point, but a third of the global food production is wasted, which equates to about 1 pound per person per day. And when you look at the overall carbon footprint of a packaged good, the majority of that carbon footprint actually comes from the product itself, right? In terms of food, it's the growing and harvesting and processing and shipping that is really accounting for the majority of that product's carbon footprint. And you don't want to waste all of that carbon that's been put into it by having a product that is spoiled and isn't actually consumed. So it's important to use the right type of package to protect the product so that it can actually be consumed the way it is meant to be consumed. Now, in terms of overall life cycle, flexible packaging has a lot of benefits over other formats, right? So if we look at a few different measurements, you can see in terms of fossil fuel usage, greenhouse gas emissions, water usage, flexible packaging is much lower than most other formats. When you look at the ratio of product to package, you can see that flexible packaging is very efficient, right? It needs very little weight to be able to pack a specific amount of product. And then even more so when you look at transporting empty packages, flexible films are pretty efficient in that way as well. So you can have quite a bit of empty packages that can be transported at once, which again just helps with the efficiency of that format. Now, there is a negative perception though, because at the end of life, what do? Usually you throw a flexible package in the trash that's going to go to the landfill, and that really makes folks feel that flexible packaging isn't actually that environmentally beneficial. So we're going to talk a bit about what actually prevents circularity in today's flexible packaging. And predominantly, there's a lot of factors, but predominantly the two big ones are the design that's inherent in the packages today, and then the infrastructure that consumers are interacting with. So if we start with just the design, we'll take a look at a package today. So right now, flexible packaging has evolved over the last few decades to really be highly functionalized and highly optimized. So something as simple as a zippered pouch that you see here, it may look very simple when you're interacting with it, but it's actually very complex and has, probably roughly a dozen layers and different materials in there that are there to provide specific functionality so that the package has all of those conveniences and features that we've come to expect. And again, this is something that's been optimized over a few decades to be really efficient at what it does. So let's look at an example. Again, as I said, I'm from Wisconsin, so we're going to do a cheese package, right? So a standard chunk cheese wrapper, like you see here, has 13 discrete layers of different material in it between the environment and the cheese product. And this, they're all there for different reasons, as I mentioned. There are layers that are helping to make sure that the cheese can be packed efficiently at the producer. Obviously, it's giving the brand a great billboard for communicating on. They build toughness into it so that it can survive being shipped across the country, right? You think about all these little blocks of cheese in a box that are kind of rubbing against each other as they're being transported, probably thousands of miles potentially. You want to make sure that it doesn't rub through. We're keeping the cheese fresh so that, again, you can go to the store and you can buy it in your local grocery store, and you don't have to consume it right away, unless of course you want to, right? That's fine too, but it's got great shelf life that built in there. The cheese doesn't dry out, it doesn't mold, so there's a lot of functionality that's been built into that package. And if that wasn't enough, the package does all of this while being the thickness of a human hair, right? So that's pretty amazing, right? That we can build all that functionality in to do all of those things and then still be just the thickness of a human hair, right? You don't realize how many layers are there because it is so thin. So let's break it down and at a very high level, look at the type of materials that are common in this type of package. Of course, we can't go into tons of details just because of the time restraints. We have at Amcor a 2-day program that we actually run to teach more about flexible packaging, where we go into the details of all these materials. But we can get you kind of started. So essentially, there are kind of 3 groups in most packages. The first, kind of at the exterior, is a layer that has to have, again, it has to be printed, and you want to have really good dimensional stability and heat resistance. And the reason for that is because, as I mentioned, when you're packing the product, you're usually using a lot of heat to be able to seal it and create those hermetic seals to hold the product in an airtight package. Obviously, the brands don't want their graphics, their beautiful branding, to be distorted when you're doing that, and you want to be able to go really fast. So you want to be able to hit it with a lot of heat. For that reason, we most commonly will use oriented PET, which is polyethylene terephthalate. This is actually the same material chemically as what water bottles are made out of. We're just using a very thin layer of it. And it's a great material for this purpose. It really does, prevent any issues with warping and can stand up to a lot of heat. The issue is that OPET, as we call it, is not very friendly for mechanical recyclability today. So there's our first kind of issue for circularity. Then usually in the middle, we'll have at least one, sometimes numerous layers of barrier materials. And really, again, this is to help have a good shelf life, protect the product, whether it's protecting it from oxygen, or potentially even some products you want to hold the moisture in, right? You don't want them to dry out. So then you want to have a barrier to moisture, but you could also have aromas and other things that you're protecting against. The most common materials for barrier layers are EVOH, which is ethylene vinyl alcohol. And there's a key in the bottom if you're not sure on some of these chemistries. Aluminum foil is another common material. Different oxide coatings, things like silicone dioxide that we can apply directly to the polymer film. PVDC, or polyvinylidene chloride, and metallization, which is, again, just depositing a very thin layer of aluminum onto the plastic film. Those are all different barriers that can potentially be used either individually or sometimes in combination. And again, depending on which ones you use, you can have issues with mechanical recyclability. So then finally, we come to the sealant layer, which is actually in contact with the product. And here again, we want to make sure that this is designed to seal and create that hermeticity at very high speeds. So generally, these are going to be low melting polyethylenes that can, again, just really flow together and kind of create that seal very well. And the good news is that most of these materials are in fact compatible with mechanical recycling today. So we don't have to do nearly as much redesigning in this space as we do in some of the other areas. So how are we improving the circularity? Well, there are a lot of options to improve overall. the sustainability of flexible packaging. And it just depends what you're looking for, right? So we can change the different raw materials that we put in. We can use things like recycled content or things that are coming from biosources rather than fossil fuels. We can design it specifically for end of life, right? Looking at recycle ready or compostable or reusable end of life. And we can also look at lowering the carbon footprint with things like, down gauging, making the film as thin as possible to provide the functionality, things like that. But today we're going to focus a bit in on recycle ready. So I'll talk a bit more about that. The first step to achieve circularity in terms of recyclability is really looking at design. So it needs to be something that we're thinking of from the starting point. And I've mentioned recycle ready a few times. I know that one sometimes can throw people off. You can see I've defined it here at the bottom. It basically means that the package has been designed for state-of-the-art recycling, which has been proven somewhere in the world, but it may or may not be regionally available for the package. So especially in terms of flexibles, which we'll talk more about, there's not always infrastructure in place to recycle them. So we design them to the best of our ability to standards that we know are accepted in other parts of the world. So designing for recyclability and having recycle ready packaging is really the first step, because again, we want to be making sure that we can reach a critical mass of material on the market so that it provides incentives to make further investments into infrastructure. Once you get to that, you can kind of move to the recyclable part of the journey, where there's infrastructure in place, but you may still not be getting a lot of material in. And that's because you're missing the last piece, which is really the consumer engagement and education, where you, again, are engaging with consumers and teaching them how and where to recycle their packaging and actually getting it to be input into the infrastructure to be recycled. So right now for flexibles, we're very much in the recycle ready stage. We're designing things for recyclability. We're using a lot of different innovations, both from material and process side, to try to get as much material on the market that's designed for recycling as possible, to kind of tip the scales to that next point. So you're probably thinking at this point that there's some trade-offs, right? It's definitely a bit of a balancing act when you're designing for recyclability, because we just talked about today's package and why those materials are there, right? Oriented PET is there to provide all that great performance on packing lines, but it's not going to work for recycling. And all those barrier materials are there to protect the product, but those may not work in mechanical recycling either. So we really have to balance what the product needs versus kind of the current state of technology that we have in terms of both packing line efficiency and different barriers for protecting the product. And this is quite a complex matrix to figure out, right? So I've just put a handful of different considerations that we have for every application. But you can see, just based on the different numbers of formats that are all in flexible packaging, that there is a very wide array of different materials that we use, different functionalities. Obviously, these are going to have different requirements in terms of barrier, in terms of what packaging lines they run on. So there's a lot of different considerations that we have to take as we figure out how to balance performance on the packing line, product protection with designing for recyclability. But I will say that when we're able to do it, it's very beneficial, right? So we have our own life cycle assessment tool in-house, where we're fortunate enough to be able to do these types of comparisons pretty easily. And we've looked at the impact of our recycle ready platform, which is called Amprima in North America. That's designed for polyethylene recyclability. And just for one specific product, so looking at a product that was designed to replace kind of a standard dry mix pouch, which for dry mix, you're going to think of things like dry soups or other powders like for beverages, powdered beverages, or even some of the things like pastas and rice that are going to be shelf stable, often with other like seasonings where you need really good moisture barrier, because you don't want your product to be like clumped when the consumer is ready to use it. Those types of applications, right? They're usually in today a paper with a film that's been like metallized, or sometimes even still foil, to preserve that and keep the moisture out. We compare that baseline package with our Amprima high barrier polyethylene laminate. You can see that the difference in energy demand, in carbon footprint, and water consumption are all really positive, right? So again, a very maybe challenging problem to solve in terms of getting the right combination put together, but in the end, it's super rewarding to see how much of an environmental impact we can make when we do it right. So this is a really great case study to look at what are the possibilities for this. So let's pivot now to talk a little bit about infrastructure, right, and how this is preventing circularity. So, if you've made an attempt to try to do something at the end of the life after you've used your flexible packaging, you've probably seen that there is a bit of the infrastructure is very much lacking today in North America. So, in order to be considered circular, you need to complete the full circle that I am showing here on this slide, right? You need to have consumers that have access to collection systems. That collected material needs to be able to be sorted properly, because generally speaking, having a jumble of different commodities together is not going to be very valuable to anyone. So then that sorted commodity needs to be able to be reprocessed, which often means either recycling or could be composting, but it needs to be reprocessed into some new material that can be reused. And then we need to have adequate end market demand for that reprocessed material. And certainly there are numerous issues that flexible packaging has today across almost all of these different pillars for circularity. So if we just look at collection and sortation today, for film recycling, North America is limited in most areas to polyethylene films only, and they are store drop-off locations only. So you may see when you go to your local, big box store or grocery store, you can see little bins like you see here on the slide, showing that you can bring back your retail grocery bags. Well, you can also bring other polyethylene films back, and obviously most consumers aren't going to know what is only polyethylene. So we encourage our customers to use the how to recycle label, which you see there, to indicate that this is in fact eligible to go back to the store for recyclability with all of those retail carrier bags. So that's, not only is it, more work for the consumer, but we find that a lot of consumers don't understand how this works, right? They can't find the bins. They don't know which bins, they can put these materials in, and they don't understand that, you can have more than just your grocery bags that come back, right? You can actually have some of these other flexible films with the store drop-off label on them incorporated into that stream as well. So there's just a lot of issues there right now, but that's kind of what we have. So that's what we're working towards. Oftentimes I also hear that people think that composting is like a great solution for flexibles. And although there are some good examples where it can be very useful to have compostable flexible films, in general, this is also a bit limited today, right? So only about 30% of the US population has access to industrial composting facilities that will actually accept film. There are other industrial composting facilities out there, but a lot of them do not really want packaging. And obviously that's because packaging doesn't add a lot of value to their composting stream, and it often takes longer than the organics do to break down. So certainly still some hurdles there as well. And The reason that I emphasize industrial composting versus some other degradation pathways like home composting is because really, in terms of industrial availability, really only industrial composting materials are highly scaled and available for like mass production at this point. So there are materials that break down in home composting conditions, but they are certainly not at the scale where we would consider them a viable solution just yet. So again, how are we improving? Well, this one is a little bit more complicated, as you can imagine. But one thing is certain, and that is that we do need to move more towards a curbside collection for flexible packaging, right? Nobody wants to be taking materials back to the store. Nobody wants to be taking materials to specific drop-offs for industrial composting. Those are just things that we know consumers don't want to do and likely won't do. So curbside collection is going to have to be a big part of success here, and collaboration is the other piece, right? Because this is something where you need not only the design for whatever that end of life is, but you also need to make sure that you've got other folks in the value chain that are willing to participate and actually collect and sort this material, right, in some way, shape, or form. So there has been one successful case study already in the States. It was called the Material Recovery for the Future project that we were a part of, where again, they actually collected flexible films for recyclability in the curbside bin with all the other recyclables. And that was done in Pennsylvania and showed a lot of success and great engagement with the community. So there are a few other collaborations right now that we're partnering with through the Recycling Partnership and the Alliance to End Plastic Waste, where again, we're looking at how additional investments can be made at material recovery facilities or MRFs to really be able to implement additional sorting for this material at the MRF so that they can handle it, and also to really strengthen the end markets for films. Because again, if there's an end market, if there's demand for the recycled material that comes out the backside, that will really stimulate the investment in the infrastructure that's needed. And so that really plays well into what's the next design challenge for flexible packaging. So we're designing for recyclability today, but for tomorrow, it's really going to be how can we incorporate more PCR or post-consumer recycled content. We know that using this material is really going to be key because it closes the loop, right? It's creating the demand for the recycled material that then will stimulate investment in infrastructure to do all the other things, right? To reprocess it, to sort it, to collect it. It really makes, it just gives incentive to make this circular economy work. And on top of that, it's also a great way to lower carbon footprint, which continues to become more and more important for our customers. So just as an example, you can see that if we have about 30% PCR in a film, in a standard film, that lowers our greenhouse gas emissions by 20%, and it also lowers our energy use by 20% overall for that product. So it's a really great environmental story that just takes it to the next level. However, it's not perfect today. So you can see on the left-hand side, there's an image of a blown film that has 30% PCR in it. And you can't quite see through it yet. So we've got a bit of work to do to make sure we can get this material to perform in the way we need it to really meet all of those requirements that we talked about at the beginning, in addition to being recyclable and then, you know, being able to reincorporate it again. So a lot of exciting work still going on in this space, but we know that there's certainly a path ahead. So I will just leave you with the fact that circularity is possible and indeed necessary, right? We know that consumers are demanding it, and at Amcor, we're committed to providing packaging that is, again, designed for circularity, certainly, and we're partnering with others to make circularity for our packaging a reality. So with that, I would be happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. That was really, it's clearly very complex. And so thank you for trying to distill it down into the amount of time that we have. It's a good reminder, I think, quite frankly, of just how much we take for granted, honestly, packaging and everything that kind of comes into our homes. And really one step is to understand that better, to be kind of part of that change. So thank you for this. We have about 10 minutes for questions. So if you haven't posed a question in the Q&A, please do that now. So the first question comes from Jim, who says, I've heard concern about harmful chemicals being transferred from plastics or polymers to food, especially where heat is involved. How is this addressed in flexible packaging?
So the kind of standard that I would think of is, a lot of the things that are moving from cans, things like soups and things that are shelf stable, those are treated very similar to what you would do in the canning process, right? So they do get packed into the flexible pouch, and then they're treated with heat to sterilize the food product so that it can be shelf stable. Now, in that case, obviously, yes, heat is going to make everything a little bit more mobile in the package. So we do use specific and special grades of adhesives and inks and even resins to make sure that everything is a bit more heat stable. So we do that first of all, and then second of all, we do pretty thorough testing to make sure that we don't see migration of anything harmful going through the package, because nobody wants to be consuming unintentional substances. So yes, there's certainly a concern there, and we take it very seriously by doing some extra testing.
Thank you. Ricardo asks, are our packaging your solution for your customers, or do they give you guidelines that you have to conform to, including price point?
So we start with, as I mentioned, kind of like some general guidelines in terms of materials we can and can't use, because we know what can actually be reprocessed in terms of recyclability. That's the first piece. But then certainly we need to adjust our designs for what the customers have for their packaging lines, potentially for their cost requirements, right? There are certain adjustments and tweaks that we need to make. And that's why I mentioned, every package is customized a little bit in some way, shape, or form, because even, two, say candy bars, if they're produced and packed by different customers, or even the same customer on different lines, they may have slightly different requirements. So we just need to take it all into account when we're designing our packages.
Thank you. Philip asks, I work in the hop industry. We package our hop pellets into Mylar foils that are not recyclable. Our customers would like the packaging to be recyclable, but we haven't been able to find materials that offer the same performance specifications that our current foils offer, CO2, O2 barriers being among the most important. Maybe we haven't been looking in the right places, but are there options that we can pursue?
So in all transparency, replacing foil is a tough one for a lot of the reasons that we mentioned, right? It's got really great barrier for moisture, for pretty much everything, right? Even light, and it's cheap, which makes it really difficult to move out of. And so there are some materials that we can replace it in terms of the barrier properties and even some of the functionality like stiffness, but to hit that same price point it's really not, there's nothing available yet today, right? You're going to probably see a bit of a price increase if that's really what you're committed to doing.
Thank you. Ricardo asks, is the 2-day education course that you mentioned available to the general public? Professionally, this would be great information to delve into. And then a comment, wow, thank you for what you shared.
Yeah, so unfortunately, we only provide it for our customers, and even that we can't do enough sessions usually over the course of the year. We usually have it fully booked pretty early on in the year because it's very popular. We've got a lot of great subject matter experts here at our Innovation Center that are able to present a lot of packaging details on every single one of those layers I showed you. So unfortunately, no, it's not open to the public, but if you end up at a customer of ours at some point, make sure you ask your sales rep.
Thank you. Sorry. Marilyn asks, a concern with plastics is that they never decay, but end up as harmful microcrystals in the environment. And they are now pretty ubiquitous. So I guess the question would be, what are companies like Amcor doing to sort of understand those issues and address them?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing we can all do is really make sure. So first of all, I'll say, I didn't talk about it today, but we do not allow the use of any type of additive that would cause our films to break down, right? We're not trying to change polyethylene into something that it's not supposed to be, right? We're really targeting that the right end of life is recyclability. And so, as I mentioned, we're trying to collaborate with a lot of industry groups to make sure not only here in North America, but all around the world, we're putting in the right type of infrastructure to handle plastic packaging. Because right now it's viewed as kind of waste, but it's really a valuable raw material that should be staying in the circular economy to be used again. And if we can keep it in that circular economy, then we don't have to, deal with the same consequences of, nobody likes plastic waste. Nobody wants plastic waste getting into the environment. We want to make sure that it's staying and being collected and reprocessed and reused as many times as possible.
Cindy asks, I see the packaging has to be dry and clean. Cleaning of those is often difficult and then they stay wet. Can they still be recycled? Getting food out is an issue too. Why can't they be recycled wet/dirty as they get melted down, reheated, likely contaminants burn off? Users can end up using a lot of water to clean them.
Yeah, so that is actually a current initiative that we have ongoing right now. We are working with How to Recycle and some other folks in the industry to try to figure out really, is there an actual issue here? I mean, we know that water will flash off in re-extrusion. So it's really a matter of, things like oils and sugars that are going to potentially stay on the package. Are those really going to be a problem? So we've got some really exciting work that we're just kind of kicking off right now to try to see what the limits really are. And hopefully we'll be able to include more products in that stream that have been kind of traditionally considered not clean or dry.
A couple of questions about consumers. First, do consumers understand that the package isn't the biggest contributor to food and beverage industry's carbon footprint?
I would say, based on kind of the overall consumer sentiment, I think that they do see packaging as being kind of an unintended consequence and not necessarily, I think they see it more as a detriment than the things I showed about protecting the product and doing these other things, right? They see it as kind of the evil that we just have to have, right? So there's certainly some space for more education around the benefits of packaging and why, it can, even if it's not recycled, how much help it can be for the environment when it's protecting that product.
And then there are probably, I'm assuming, multiple forces of change on packaging industry for moving to circularity or becoming more sustainable. So to what extent is it your customers that are driving that and consumers driving them, regulatory changes? So I know that can be a complicated question, but what is the biggest drivers of kind of packaging industry moving in this direction?
Yeah, so in terms of design, it's very much the industry. They're taking upon themselves to redesign. In terms of actually getting more of these packages on the shelves, I think that's where we're going to see legislation being the biggest push, right? Because we know that there are probably still going to be some concessions in terms of, we can make it as heat resistant as we want, but it's not going to run quite as fast as what they were running on their machines. So until there's kind of a incentive for them to make the switch, there's going to be a lot of brands who aren't going to want to make that switch. So to get things on shelves, we're going to need a little bit more legislation. And as there is more legislation evolving in the US, we'll see kind of how that changes here.
Thank you. Justin asks, is there anything from a supply chain POV that you see changing in the wake of the latest rail cart issue in Ohio?
Yeah, so I mean, I don't know that we're going to see change. I mean, we use tremendous amounts of of resin in a lot of our facilities every day. And so you can't not transport resin by rail. It just wouldn't be feasible. So I think it's just going to continue to be, we have to be conscientious of the resin that's in our facilities. We're part of Operation Clean Sweep, as well as a lot of other industry organizations that try to make sure that there's no resin that is going down drains or anything like that, right? So we're all trying to do our part to keep it kind of contained and keep it out of the environment. But in terms of, broad changes, I just don't see that unless they can come up with another way to transport mass amounts of resin at once.
And you mentioned an example of pre-competitive collaboration at Amcor, or maybe a couple of examples. But where do you see kind of the greatest change in terms of dealing with some of these issues as pre-competitive opportunities, that while still trying to protect Amcor's intellectual property, as an example? So is that in research on materials? Is it how you collectively communicate with consumers? Like what are some of the other examples that you can share that are coming down the pike where the packaging industry is working collaboratively?
Yeah, so one of the biggest things that we've tried to do over the last few years has really been emphasizing design, right? So we work with a lot of industry groups, and including like the US Plastics Pact and the Association for Plastic Recyclers, to really help evangelize, I would say, even kind of what is the best practices for design as a starting point, right, for recyclability. And then from there, I guess we can, of course, put our own touch on things through our own research, but we really want to make sure that at a basic level, the industry is really getting it right from the start. So we're kind of involved on that and just trying to spread the word there first. And I guess trying to think, I think over the course of the next few months, the US Plastics Pact is actually going to be publishing their guidance on circularity. So there's going to be a section on recyclability, compostability, and reusability for plastics specifically. And we contributed a great deal of kind of helping shape that in terms of recyclability. So that's something to look forward to.
One last question, if you can answer it. It's Jacqueline asks, could you talk about the bill introduced in Oregon, or it actually passed the Oregon legislature around packaging, kind of managing packaging as a waste product, so impacting the CPG organizations, and what impact that bill will have? So I guess, one, are you aware of the legislation in Oregon? That's probably the first question.
Yeah. So I'm aware of the few states that have already passed extended producer responsibility in some way, shape, or form. I can't tell you the nuances of each one at this point, especially because half of it's unknown and the other half is, trying to keep the whatever 4 states straight at this point. But I will say that, overall, if it's done well, extended producer responsibility is only going to help in terms of pushing for investment for more infrastructure, right? Which is one of the big things that's holding flexibles back today. And so we're definitely supportive of it as long as it's done well, and that requires a lot of education for regulators, because they also don't understand that there's 13 layers of material in a flexible package that are all there for a specific reason. So we really need to be on the forefront of trying to help them understand that and understand the value of that.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, thank you again so much for your great presentation today and for answering our questions. We appreciate it. And thanks to those of you who joined us today. You'll see that posted in the chat is a link to a short survey. We'd love to get your feedback. We're interested in topics that are relevant to you and how we're doing. So this is only as good as it's useful to you. So thanks for taking the time to give us feedback. And we're also doing these monthly. And so our next webinar will be March 17th, where we'll have somebody join us from Nestle who will talk about what the sustainability program looks like at Nestle and the implications to the rest of the food system as a large CPG company. So again, thank you for joining us and have a wonderful weekend.